Well, how you doing, students? Where's my high school weekend people at? Y'all been quiet, make some noise? Anyone semi-excited about the awesome trip we had this past weekend? Yeah. Flying around on zip lines, doing all kinds of crazy things. If you are a high school student or you're going to be a high school student next year, plan on being there with us because it is an absolutely great time. We are in week 3 of our series Potential, and so I'm not sure if you were with us. We weren't here last week, but before that, I want to catch you up because it's been a little bit of time. We talked the very first week of the series about the idea that you have potential. You have potential in all the areas of your life and your future jobs, your future careers, your future decisions, your future friends, and specifically, you have potential in who you date, how you date, and who you marry. And that is one of the biggest potentials you will ever have. But the biggest potential that you have in your life is the potential to be the person that God has called you to be. That is the most important thing. And we looked in the book of Philippians and said that we should live our lives in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. That when we look at all that Christ did, that we would live our lives in response to that. And then week 2, we kind of picked up from there. And we looked at we asked the question, what's first in our life? That there's a lot of things that can sneak in and start to take that first place. That sports can start to take that first place. Friends can start to take that first place. Video games can start to take that first place. Relationships can start to take that first place. That most important spot in your life. And we said, hey, anything that tries to take the first place in our life and it's not God is an idol. It's trying to steal the glory from God. It's trying to take what it is. He gets the first spot in our life. And everything flows from that. So with those two ideas, we're going to kind of continue on in this train of thought. Live in a manner worthy of a gospel. That we're living in response to what Jesus has done for us. And that if he has the top spot in our life, if he is first in our life, then that means he gets to decide how things work. He's the authority, not us. He's right, not us. And like we have talked about, the reality is of where you're at in your life, in your teenage years, you are most likely going to date or have already started dating. And there is going to be real pressures in your life when it comes to dating. There's going to be pressures on what type of person you should date. That people are going to tell you should just date a person just because you like the way that they look. That the other things are unimportant, their character, how they treat people, the things they spend their time doing. You're going to have pressure on who to date. You're going to have pressure on how to date. You're going to have pressure based off of what the people around you are doing. You're going to have pressure and ask the question, how far is too far? There is going to be pressure in the reality of dating in your life. And the reality is when that pressure comes, it often leads to compromise. When that pressure comes, it often leads to us compromising. And I'm not just talking about physically compromising, but I'm talking about spiritually compromising, that we stop being the people that God is calling us to be. Now, we're going to be looking at a story in the Bible that is we're going to see someone who was supposed to be great. We're going to see someone who was supposed to be a hero. We're going to see someone who was supposed to be God's guy. And we're going to see him compromise and find himself in a place that we never thought he would be. And so as we talk through this story, there is going to be some sexual topics that get talked about. And so what I want to ask you for, because I believe that you can do it, is just for a little bit of maturity. Can you guys do that for me? Because here's the thing, sometimes this can feel like an awkward topic to talk about, and I get that. But here's the way I see it, and it's actually my first point for you today. We should not be ashamed to discuss what God wasn't ashamed to create. We should not be ashamed to discuss what God wasn't ashamed to create. Specifically in the church, this isn't a topic that's off limits. This isn't a topic that we don't talk about. This isn't a topic that is gross or bad, but when we're talking about it in the right way and how it honors God and how we're supposed to navigate through it, that this is something that should be talked about. Because the realities are real. There is pressure. There's a danger of compromise. And so if we don't talk about what's right, we risk the danger of doing what's wrong. And we're going to look at the story today of a guy named David. You might know him. He was a king of Israel. And before he was king, he was God's chosen king of Israel. God sent the prophet out to go find him. He was a shepherd out in the field. And when everyone else thought anyone else could have been king, God said, this is going to be my guy. He's the guy that slew Goliath. Like this was God's guy. You're saying, hey, if anyone's gonna do this right, if anyone's gonna honor God with his life and all of the things, it's going to be this guy. And really, this specific story in his life is the story of compromise. That he made one compromise, and another compromise, and another compromise, and another compromise, and that led him to a place far from God and far from anywhere he wanted to be. So if you have your Bibles, we're gonna be in 2 Samuel. It's gonna be in the Old Testament, so a little bit earlier in the Bible than we usually are, but I'd love for you to turn there with us. We're also gonna have it up on the screen. And so it says in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It says, but David remained at Jerusalem. When everyone else was supposed to go out to war, the king stayed home. It said he sent his guy Joab, his buddy Joab. It said he sent the armies, he sent the people, but he was hanging back. He's like, hey, this is everyone else's thing, but it's not necessarily my thing right now. And the crazy thing is when we see God institute the role of the king, one of the main things that is said is he is the person that leads the people out to war. But David began to compromise, and instead of doing what God had called him to do, it says he stayed home. And maybe you're like, hey, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. Like maybe you're making a little bit too big of a deal about this. But like I said, compromise usually starts small. Like we don't wake up one day saying, hey, today I'm going to drop out of school, right? That's not a normal thought that we do, but we might take one small step of compromise and say, hey, today I'm just not gonna study. I'm just not feeling like it. We might take another small step of compromise and say, hey, today I'm just gonna not pay attention in class. And another small step of compromise is like, hey, I'm basically checked out now. I don't really care what happens. And another small step and another small step. And next thing you know, we're flunking out of school or we're dropping out. That's not where it started. It started way back here. We don't wake up in the morning and say, hey, today I'm going to ruin all of my friendships. But we'll make one small step of compromise and say, hey, today what's important for me is more important than everyone else. We might make one small step of compromise and say, hey, the way that other people treat me is more important than the way that I treat other people. And we make one small step of compromise and say, hey, the words that I say about other people isn't reflective of the words that other people say about me. And we make one small step and one small step and one small step, and we find ourselves far from where God wanted us to be. And then all of our relationships are toxic and destroyed. It didn't start there though. See, it's the story of small compromises. And that was the story for David. David didn't wake up that morning saying, hey, today I'm going to get someone pregnant. He just stayed at home. And because he was staying at home, he found himself in places he wasn't supposed to be. And because he found himself in places he wasn't supposed to be, he started doing things he shouldn't have been doing. And because he started doing things he shouldn't have been doing, he made one small step and found himself in a place he never thought he'd be. It starts with the small compromises. And that danger is real for him as just as it's real for us. I want you to read what happens next in verse 2. It said it happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch He was walking on the roof of the king's house. Then he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now he had been purifying herself from her uncleanliness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." The story started way back here with one small compromise that led to another one, that led to another one, that led to another one, that found himself in a place he probably never thought he would be. Right? And this story reads like, something out of a drama, right? Like it sounds like something you see on TV. But this was his life. He said, "Hey, I never thought I'd be here. I just didn't go out to war when I was supposed to. I just slept in." You know what the story doesn't say? It doesn't say David got up early in the morning and spent time with God. And because David got up early and spent time with God, he made one right step. He treated people the way they were supposed to, and he made another right step. He saw something and he said, "Hey, this isn't a situation I need to be in," and he made another right step. That's not what the story says. He made the small compromises again and again and again and again and found himself in a place far from God and far from anywhere he thought he'd be. And here's the thing, the pressure, as real as it was for David, it's real for us. The compromises can lead us to a place we never thought we would be. And it's not the end of the world if you don't spend time with God one day. It's not the end of the world if you miss one responsibility, but the pattern of behavior of one compromise after another, after another, after another, often leads you to a place you never thought you'd be, doing things you never thought you'd do. Because of the small compromises David was making, it started shaping him to be a completely different person. David's story started, he was a shepherd, he was taking care of a sheep, he saved the people of Israel. He had the king over him trying to kill him, but he was honoring the king. David was doing all the right things. He was making all the right steps. And now we find himself in this period of his life where it seems like he isn't spending time with the presence of God, and that is beginning to affect who he is. The story continues. Now that he's found out that he got this woman pregnant, is actually the wife of one of his friends, one of his soldiers. He invites that soldier back 3 times to try and spend time with his wife so he could just say that it was that person's kid. And 3 times he tries to convince this guy to go spend time with his wife, and the guy says, "Hey, I'm not gonna go enjoy my wife when all of the other people are out fighting in war. I'm not gonna go spend time with her and rest and do all of these things when people are out fighting and dying for God." The exact opposite of the way that David was acting. Uriah was saying, "Hey, I'm not gonna do what's best for me. I'm gonna do what's best, what God's called me to do, what's best for the people of God." And all David cared about, what was best for him. Completely changed who he was. The small compromises again and again and again. And the story doesn't even end there. Because he wouldn't spend time with his wife, so he couldn't play it off that it was this other guy's kid, he sends Uriah into the heaviest part of the battle until he gets the news that Uriah had died. We'll pick it up in verse 26. It says, "When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son." Don't miss this, students. "But the thing David had done displeased the Lord." The thing David had done displeased the Lord. Maybe you're asking, what does this have to do with me? Like that's some guy from way back long ago doing a bunch of wrong things. Like I'm not killing anyone so I can spend time with their wife. Like that's not my story. What does this have to do with me? Maybe today the thing that you need to hear is the things that you are doing have displeased the Lord. Because you're not living in a way that's worthy of the gospel of Christ. Living in response to what Jesus has done for you. You're not living in a way where God is first, that God has the top spot, and you've begun to make compromise after compromise after compromise after compromise, and the pressure has set in, and you found yourself in a place far from God and far from anywhere you thought you'd be. And the same thing that God said to David, he's saying the thing that they are doing has displeased the Lord. Here's my next point for you guys. The pressure to be with someone can cause you to compromise for anything. The pressure to be with someone can cause you to compromise for anything. For David, the pressure of being with Bathsheba caused him to compromise so many things. He killed her husband. He probably broke laws that were for other people but not for himself just to get to that point. And like I said earlier, there is a reality, there is pressure on us, pressure from around us, pressure from inside of us. We have these feelings, we have these desires, we don't know what to do with them. And if we are not careful and if we are not guarding ourselves, they can cause us to take a small compromise and another one and find ourselves far from God and far from anywhere He wanted to be. I was reading, I love this quote. He was from a pastor that I listened to. He was talking about desires. He used the word appetite. Maybe you like food and you're like, hey, I have an appetite. I'll eat some food. I enjoy a taco or two, right? And he says, hey, like any appetite, just like with any food that we would eat, the more we feed our appetite, the more it grows. And he was making the point, hey, the more we feed our sexual appetite, the more it will grow. The more we engage in sexual sin, the more it will grow. And this is what he said. He says, the more we commit it, the more we will feel that we need it, the easier it will be to do it, and the harder it will become to stop. The more we commit it, the more we will feel the need to do it, the easier it will be to do it, and the harder it will be to stop. And listen, if we are in this room and we're saying, hey, Jesus has done something in my heart. Jesus has done something in my life. I want to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. I want to live in response for what Jesus has done for me. I want to live like God has the top spot in my life and I'm following. And he says, hey, this isn't an area we can just do what we want. Paul's going to say it like this in 1 Corinthians 6:18. He says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price, so glorify God with your body. He says, flee from sexual immorality. He says, run. This word literally means escape. He says that when it comes to sexual sin, when it comes to sexual temptation, when it comes to anything outside the bounds of what God has called good and right, he said if you find yourself in that situation, your job is to run in the other direction. And there's a lot of emphasis in this word in the Greek. Like the way that they put it in there, the sentence structure, it is emphasizing it. And so when he's saying run, I have a picture for you. He's not saying like, hey, go on a casual jog, right? He's not saying get some friends and y'all just, go go running. He's saying like, there is danger coming for you. You need to get out of here. I have another picture. It's more like this, right? There's a giant wave, something's coming after you. It's more like this next picture, right? This isn't run, this is run. Get out of here, escape, danger is coming for you. I have one last picture to show you. Now, if that's not running, I don't know what is. And that's what he's saying here. Like, I know we're laughing, but he's saying, hey, there is a real danger. When he says flee from sexual immorality, flee from sexual sin, he says it will harm you, it will hurt you, and you need to run from it. You need to run. You need to flee. You need to escape. And so for the little bit of time I have left with you, I just want to give you 3 practical tips on how we can run well. 3 practical tips on how we can flee well. The first one is we flee by not being in tempting situations. If we want to run well, if we want to flee well, we flee by not being in tempting situations. I was watching the Karate Kid 2 the other day. Any Karate Kid fans in here? Like old school Karate Kid, not just Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is great, but it's not as good as the originals, right? And so in Karate Kid 2, if you don't know the story, they go back to Okinawa, to Mr. Miyagi's family, like where he grew up, and they're doing all these things, and some of Mr. Miyagi's old rivalries are coming in, and these people are coming up, and kind of the narrative of the Karate Kid story is you're gonna get beat up at the beginning of the movie so you can learn some things so you don't get beat up at the end of the movie. That's my synopsis, all right? That's my synopsis of the movie. And so we're gonna find ourselves, he gets beat up at the beginning of the movie, and we find ourselves in the middle of the movie where he's learning how to get beat up, not get beat up, and he asks Mr. Miyagi, hey, what's the best block? Hey, teach me the best block. Teach me the best defense. And Mr. Miyagi says, you wanna know the best defense? No, be there. You wanna know the best defense? No, be there. And Daniel's son is like, no, be there? What does that mean? The best defense to a fight is to not be in the fight. It's really hard to get hit if you're not fighting someone. And in the same way that we're saying, hey, we want to flee from sexual sin, the best way that we can run well, our best defense about sexual sin is not to find ourselves in there. No, be there. And maybe that means you need to set some boundaries, like, hey, I'm not going to be alone with my boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe that means you set some boundaries and say, hey, I'm not going to be in environments where I know there's gonna be sexual sin in them. Like, I'm not gonna put myself in environments, my defense is I'm not going to be there. No, be there. Second way we flee by removing temptation from our life. We flee by removing temptation from our life. Fleeing sexual sins means we do whatever it takes to avoid it. And it might call for some drastic things. It might mean we don't watch certain shows because of the content that's in them. We don't listen to certain types of music because of the content that's in it. It might mean we need to get filters put on our computers because of the things that are on it. That we don't go into certain situations because we know the things that are happening in them. And maybe you're like, hey, I feel like you're overreacting. I don't know, I feel like the data would back me up. So for example, if you wanna know the top 8 visited websites in the world, the first one's Google, second one's YouTube, third one's Facebook, fourth one's Amazon, fifth one's Yahoo, 6, 7, and 8 are all pornographic websites. Top 8 visited sites in the world, worldwide. It's not just that we can't be there. Sometimes we have to say, hey, it's coming for me, so for me to run, I need to get it out. I need to remove the temptation because there's pressure. And maybe we don't have an intention to end up on this side doing things we know we shouldn't be doing, but it starts with the small compromises. And the best way we can stop the small compromises is by taking one right step. My last point for you is probably what I feel like is the best first right step. We flee by becoming more influenced by God than the world. We flee by becoming more influenced by God than the world. And this is a warning to us, because the other side of that reality is we can live in a way where we're more influenced by the world than we're influenced by God. The movies and shows we watch, the music we listen to, the conversations we have with our friends, there's so many influences, there's so many pressures in our life calling us to compromise. That's why we started in week 1 and said, hey, we have to answer the question, if we are Jesus followers, do we want to live in a manner worthy of the gospel? Do we want to live in response to all that Jesus has done? And if that's true, is God number one in our life? Does he have the top spot, or is it a relationship? Is it sports? Is it something else? Because if we're living in a manner worthy and we're saying we want God to have the top spot, that means we have to do what he says. And he says when it comes to sexual sin, you need to run and not a casual jog. There is danger. It wants to harm you. It wants to hurt you. It does not want what's best for you. And the best thing you can do is run. And like I said, I think about David's story. And I just imagine what David's story would have looked like if it said David got up early that morning and he spent some time with the Lord. How would that have affected what happened on the roof? How would that affected the commands that he sent to have Uriah killed? How would that affect the story that he told to cover it all up? If he would have said, hey, I'm gonna let God influence me, then all the pressures and compromises around me. You see, when pressure becomes a problem, presence becomes a solution. As we start making the right steps away from compromise, and we step into time with God, and we step into the things that he's called us, and we start looking like the people that he's called us to be, we find the presence of God on us and the power of God helping us in all the areas of our life. And maybe you're thinking, you're like, hey, I don't know that this is a problem for me. This is a big issue for me. I don't know if I can find myself in that situation. And I don't know that I can run. What I'm telling you, if you know Jesus, he's given you the power to do it. The same power that raised Jesus from the grave lives inside of you, and it is empowering you to be the people that God's called you to be in all the potential situations of your life. Eventually, David got to a point in his life where he was heartbroken over what he had done. He started making the steps back, and he started making the steps back, and he started making the steps back, and he looked back on what happened on that season in his life, and it broke him. He wrote stories about it. And he writes this in Psalm 51, verse 1. He says, have mercy on me, God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. We talked a lot about grace if you were with us at high school weekend. Grace is undeserved favor, God's kindness, God's favor on our behalf in a way that we don't deserve. But God's mercy is the other side of that coin. It's punishment and consequences that we do deserve, that God says, hey, that's not on you anymore. Because I put that on Jesus. And David here, realizing what he's done, finds himself at a place in his life where he's coming back to God saying, hey, I know I've messed up. And he says, have mercy on me. And maybe you're thinking, hey, I don't think God's going to have mercy on me because of what I've done. And I love what he says is the basis of God's mercy. He doesn't say it because of your good behavior. He doesn't say it because of your church attendance. He doesn't say it because, you only use made-up cuss words and not the real ones. He says the basis of God's mercy on your life is according to his steadfast love, a love that doesn't change, it doesn't waver, it doesn't turn, it is steady, and it is coming for you. And I don't know all the stories in this room, but I know that sexual sin hurts, and I know that it harms, and I know that there's probably people that have already begun walking into it, and they felt the effects, and they felt the shame, and they feel the guilt, and they've probably already started experiencing some of the consequences of compromise. And what I love is the hope that David has for people who are coming to a God whose love doesn't change and says, God, today, can you have mercy on me? And tomorrow, can you have mercy on me? And the next day, can you have mercy on me? And the next day, can you have mercy on me? And shame will tell you that you're not worthy of it. And God will say, hey, if you don't believe that you're worthy, look at the cross. Shame will tell you that you're not worth loving. And God will say, if you don't feel like you're worth loving, look at the cross. Shame will tell you you don't deserve it. And God will say, shame is right. You don't deserve it, but because of my great love for you, I'm giving it to you anyways. And that is where God meets us in the midst of what we're walking through. And here's the thing, the story that God is writing for your life and who you date and how you date and who you marry isn't over. And even if you've gotten to a place where you've already messed it up, there is hope for you. You are not beyond being loved. You are not beyond God's best for your life, because he's a God of grace and mercy, giving us the good that we don't deserve. And he's not doing it because of something in you. He's doing it because he loves you. And when we find ourselves in those situations and we feel unlovable and we feel undeserving, man, I pray you pick this book up and you take a step towards God and remind yourself of what he's done for you. That you take a step towards God and you read how far he went for you. That you take a step towards God and you read the hope that he has for you. And that begins to shape you in the right way. There is hope for you. God's best is on the table for every single person in this room. And not because of anything you've done, but because he loves you. That's who our God is. Pray with me.